it's always been kind of motivated by this desire to gather people together who are interested in search and, help people learn from each other, really. And yeah, we've there's things that we've done along the way that have allowed us to sort of create an event. There's, only so many parameters you can play with, but yeah, we try to think we've got a slightly different mix of the combination of things that you put into an event that hopefully seems to have resonated with quite a lot of people over the years, and has allowed us to kind of have a successful event and also a successful business off the back of that.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Kelvin Newman with us. Kelvin is the founder of Rough Agenda, the company that arranges specialist digital marketing events, including BrightonSEO, which is a huge event, amazing event in Brighton, UK, where I've spoken several times. Kelvin is an amazing person. We're going to learn lots of great stuff. Kelvin, it's so great to have you on the show.
Fantastic. No, thanks for having me. Yeah, really, excited to be invited along and have a bit of a conversation today. Yeah, hopefully some interesting bits will come up.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about your origin story, how you ended up founding BrightonSEO and getting into marketing events and not just running an agency or doing SEO. What brought this about?
Yeah, so I'm, albeit now that I organise events for a living, I still kind of think of myself as an SEO or as an SEO rather than a search marketer. I always did a bit of both, but SEO was the one that kind of came to me kind of more naturally. So yeah, after leaving university, I did media studies and student radio and all of that sort of stuff. Joined a publishing company who ran a number of magazines. And whilst I was there, kind of working as a relatively junior sort of admin role, really, got involved with their websites. So at that point in time, they were very much in this kind of process. Yes, we've got magazines, but we should be doing more of our websites. And they had some pretty decent websites, but the reality was that most of the journalists wanted to be in the published paper version. So albeit that they had these pretty decent websites, there was relatively little interest in kind of doing more than they had to for them. So despite not having kind of a journalist role, I kind of put myself forward, wrote a few articles, kind of got involved in that side of things. And yeah, very quickly in the process of trying to write content that connected and did well on those websites, sort of came across SEO, and it really felt like a good fit for my interests. So it's obviously there's that kind of writing and written English sort of side of things to it that obviously I find incredibly interesting, but also this kind of techie side of things as well. So I've never been a web designer. I've never been, kind of from a coding background, but this kind of mixture of understanding how people think about words was really interesting to me. So sort of came across SEO, found an SEO trainee role down in Brighton. So I was working up in London, traveling up from Brighton. So Brighton's about an hour away from London on the train. So I was doing that commute every day and got this opportunity to lose the commute and do a really interesting thing, joined as an SEO trainee and found myself doing it. And yeah, the route to ending up organising events was I was an SEO in the early days of Twitter. We were sort of having conversations using hashtags to find people who had similar interests to you. And there was one that kind of emerged, Brighton SEO, for people who are in the city of Brighton and working in SEO. And that kind of became a way to sort of discover people in those early days of Twitter. Someone said, yeah, let's arrange a meetup down the pub. That first one happened. And then after a while I said, well, I'm happy to organise a little afternoon one. So if we can kind of book a pub for the afternoon, get a projector, we can go down the pub at lunchtime rather than wait till after work. Because prior to that, it had just been a kind of let's get a few people together after work and have a chat. So then it just became initially just an excuse really to go down the pub at lunchtime. So we did that first event. We had room for 20 people and 30 people showed up. So next time round, we booked a bigger space, had room for 100 people and 120 people showed up. And they were like, okay, there's obviously a bit of something here. So then kind of went through this process of, incrementally booking bigger venues and getting more and more people along. And then we ended up in much bigger venues, one called the Brighton Dome. And we were selling they'd always been free to attend. So we were distributing these free tickets and we were selling them out in 30 seconds and stuff like that. So then switched to a ballot, started to include some paid for tickets. There's a free ballot you could apply for and all that kind of thing. And yeah, and here we are now. So we do the UK event we do twice a year in Brighton, about 4,000 people coming along from 50 different countries to learn about search and coming together for that, and that's been going very, very well and doing very nicely. Kind of, COVID stepped into the equation for a couple of years, but we've come out the back of that and found ourselves in a really good place. And now kind of in the process of launching an event in San Diego. So it's exciting times for us, and it's always been kind of motivated by this desire to gather people together who are interested in search and help people learn from each other, really. And we've there's things that we've done along the way that have allowed us to sort of create an event that's there's only so many ways you can produce an event, right? There's only so many parameters you can play with, but we try to think we've got a slightly different mix of the combination of things that you put into an event that hopefully seems to have resonated with quite a lot of people over the years, and has allowed us to kind of have a successful event and also a successful business off the back of that.
Yeah. And how many attendees typically at a Brighton SEO event?
So it's about 3,500 people per every 6 months. So it's not all through the door at one point in time. There's that's spread over a couple of days. But it's a very big old chunk of people. And that's obviously sort of also quite different to perhaps. So to get into like crazy sort of like event lingo speak, you get this idea of like conferences, exhibitions and trade shows. And generally speaking, most of the search events that are around at the moment, there have been other ones in the past, tend to fall more into kind of that conference side of things. So you're paying for a ticket, might be single track or a small number of tracks, maybe hundreds of people, which is great and they're a great format. But like one of the things that I think works well with the Brighton SEO format is that there's this like slightly larger scale of number of attendees, and that's really, really powerful because it allows, particularly now in the days of remote work and all that kind of thing, we've got like businesses where that they only catch up 4 times a year, and 2 of those at Brighton SEO. So because they'll be distributed all over the country and the world, and they'll come together to do that, or there'll be agencies and they're bringing their clients or people you used to work with who you've now gone on to work for another agency but you've not seen for it's that kind of like there's any kind of bringing together people has those elements of sort of like it's nice to catch up with people, but the more people you've got, the greater the likelihood is that there's those kind of like fortunate meetings sort of happening off the back of that. And that's obviously a big part of the appeal above and beyond the kind of sitting down and listening to people deliver a talk. It's the value of these kind of connections that you've got there, and we're trying to do more to kind of like provide environments to sort of encourage those sort of either starting of those friendships or relationships, or like supporting them. And obviously there's the classic ones like we do some big parties, that's sort of what you come to expect from conferences, but we're trying to do like, okay, well, we'll do a yoga meetup, we've got 5k runs, we do beach cleans, all these sort of things as well that obviously are like an opportunity for people to meet like-minded individuals and hopefully sort of broaden their network, learn from each other, and have a successful sort of couple of days at the office.
Yeah, that happened for me, with my first Brighton SEO, Michael Janellis from Pitchbox, good friend of mine who has been a friend for many, many, many years, made sure that I met Gareth Simpson at the first Brighton SEO that I attended and spoke at. And then he became a good friend, and then I ended up coaching him. And it's really cool how you made that happen through your event. I would not have gone to the UK otherwise, and now comes full circle. I ended up introducing you to Gareth, and you had him as a speaker and workshop teacher and stuff. Yeah,
it's amazing this the kind of serendipity of these things, and also the kind of it's amazing the kind of value that I've got is so back in the day, people who I kind of randomly happen to be put on a panel with, or happen to be sat next to at some random dinner or whatever, and then they've gone on to either be like really good friends, or I've been able to refer them a bit of business, they've been able to refer us a bit of and it it's that's the way of the world, isn't it? But it's kind of nice that I enjoy that personally, kind of seeing those kind of connections be forged, and also obviously hugely benefit from that myself as well.
Yeah. Speaking of Michael and Gareth, both have been guests on this show, and I'm going to link to those, or my team will link to those episodes in the show notes. One thing I was curious about is why are you branching out to San Diego? That is a huge departure from what you normally do with the twice a year event in Brighton, and now, San Diego of all places. I'm curious how that came about.
Yeah, I mean, some of it was again sort of it'd been on our list for a really long time. Like people such as yourself traveling over and kind of saying, "Oh, we really like this event. You should do something in the States." We had lots of those kind of like prompts over the years, and obviously in the post-COVID environment, lots of the events have changed somewhat. So either a number have not come back for a variety of reasons. Some have switched much more to online focused, and maybe not so much in person. And of course, the calendars all sort of changed around. So there was a degree of kind of like it felt like some of the events that we were like, well, we wouldn't do anything in the States because we like those events haven't come back. So like Search Love isn't running anymore. HeroConf, the PPC Hero event isn't currently running anymore. SMX is still about, but kind of is perhaps at the moment seems to be primarily about the online experience. So yeah, it just kind of felt like there was a bit of an opportunity there as well. We were very fortunate to make a great hire. So a person became available as we were kind of starting to look at this. And Lindsay, who's been involved in Search Love since its foundation and more recently with HeroConf, became available. So it was just kind of the stars aligning to some extent in terms of doing something in the US. And then we...
Just by the way, this just came to me. You should meet Mike Stalzner. He's the founder of Social Media Marketing World and Social Media Examiner.
Yeah, I kind of know very loosely, but yeah, definitely on the kind of like, yeah, an inspiration in terms of doing some great stuff there. But yeah, and yeah, San Diego kind of came about in a kind of a process of going, well, we wanted to find a city that felt like it had quite a lot of potential to grow into. So obviously they've got some good spaces. We're in a hotel at the moment, like still a very large hotel, but like there's the convention center that works very, very well. There is a history of sort of the Comic Con and social media world and all of that kind of stuff happening, proving that there's kind of like events like ours could work in that space. And yeah, it was that kind of, again, we wanted to make it so Brighton, for people who don't know, who've never been to the UK, Brighton's a seaside city. Our venue now is like within, like, it's literally on the road that the sea is on, so it's right by the beach there. It kind of spills out into the bars and sort of restaurants and cafes that are like literally on the promenade. So like in my mind, I kind of quite like the idea of somewhere being on the water. So San Diego is obviously like on the ocean, so you've got that connection there. But some of the other places we were looking at were like on on the lakes and that kind of thing as well. So it felt like that kind of holiday seasidey thing felt like another nice sort of like connecting pattern to what we've been doing. And I think like that's not to say we couldn't have made an event like in New York or somewhere work, but it's kind of like it felt like that was another sort of tick in the box to kind of go, well, how do we take this thing that's been in kind of one quite specific UK location and sort of like transpose that to a different city? And that was kind of another area that sort of San Diego felt like it was a good option to do. So yeah, we'll see how it works out. We're kind of quite excited about it. Obviously there's been some various search events in San Diego and more broadly sort of like in California. So it kind of felt like it might be one that like might work. So, the jury's still out, but at the moment, all the feedback we've had is kind of like a good sign. Whenever we asked anyone about where we should be, like, I was doing lots of kind of asking questions and various LinkedIn and, Twitter and all that kind of thing about where we should be hosting events. And yeah, every time, I'd ask the question, I get like another 10 cities that like it's, that's such a really good idea, and there's so many options on there. It was quite hard to make that choice. So some of it came down to venue availability as much as anything as well.
Yeah. Speaking of making choices, how do you pick pitches?
Interesting. Yeah. So our processes, we have a pitch form up on our website all year round. So we don't have a specific kind of deadline or kind of process like that. And equally, we do a little bit, but we don't do like some events are very much like they'll almost decide who they want to get to speak and then approach them. Whereas we kind of select it from the people who pitch for us. So we have that form up the year round. And then at certain stages of the planning cycle, we'll start to kind of sift through and prioritize certain pitches and start to bring them through. And then we'll do like a second wave once we're kind of we've got a few sorted there, and then we're like, so at the moment in the UK sort of cycle, we've got probably 90% of our speakers sorted, but what we'll then do is kind of group them into sessions and then choose a few extra speakers that fit with it. Like we've got 2 here about this topic, so then we're choosing one that kind of fits with that. And so yeah, we're predominantly choosing on topic. That's like our main sort of route to choosing who we we speak, and then we sort of like we look at the topic first, then the person second. So to that extent, we encourage people to pitch lots of times. So if you've got like 20 ideas for a talk, that's brilliant for us because it's a greater opportunity to do that. And that's kind of, it's me as an editor, so I'm kind of making a judgment call on what I think will and won't be popular, and what's kind of current there as well. But things we're particularly looking for is we like our talks are quite short, so they're like 20 minutes. They're in groups of 3, so we like to try and find those there's like that we could imagine fitting with other talks. And we like them to be practical. So like if someone goes like how to do that's already a great starting point for me. We like them to be quite specific. So often we'll get pitches where someone will come in and say, I could do a talk about link building, and then never really gets into the detail of what they cover. And they might be an absolute expert. And in many cases, they really are. We get so many good people pitching to speak, but we're trying to find a kind of, well, what's the particular subset that they're going to cover that's going to bring, it doesn't necessarily have to be new, but like, that's going to feel like we can program into something. And yeah, there's lots that we've tried to do in terms of broadening the reach of who, like partially it's because of the process of how we select the talks, but like we like new speakers. Like for us, actually, like a lot of other events, particularly those that are kind of more that traditional conference where they're trying to sell like a $1,500 ticket, they're trying to kind of program who's going to be like most attracting ticket sales. And because our event works slightly differently, because we've got the free tickets, the cheaper tickets, because often our registration occurs before people even we've decided the speaker program, that allows us to be a bit more flexible and kind of go, well, actually, if this person's never spoken at an event before, for us, that's good, right? Because it's a new perspective. Whereas I think sometimes other events, inevitably, because of their business model, are kind of going, well, who's the best known speaker who I know will absolutely, definitely do a good job? And then they worry about the topic. And that's just like the business model encourages that kind of slightly different behaviour. But that does give us a bit of an opportunity to present our program slightly differently. We're never perfect, and we're not the big event now. So a lot of the people who are speaking at our events are, regulars and established now. But we do like that opportunity to go, whose idea do we like, rather than, who's got the highest profile already.
So what are some of the hottest kind of trending topics that you want to make sure to cover in Brighton or San Diego or wherever?
Yeah, San Diego's like probably it's really interesting actually. So like the pitch process. So like San Diego's like, I don't know, 8 weeks or so after the next UK one. And so obviously the speaking pitches are like a bit later, and it's amazing. There's kind of difference of like how AI is appearing, like not surprising to anyone, but like it's really quite noticeable. Like the Brighton pitches, which was sort of pre the most recent like increase in the topic, and then San Diego, which is like after, where it's like basically like 70 to 80% of the pitches we get to San Diego have some variation of AI in it. And like obviously there's a huge variety of what's being covered. So some will be talking about how you can use it in paid search, how you can use it to create content ideas, how you can use it to audit your website. So all kinds of different topics. But yeah, everyone's kind of got that same idea of that kind of process. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely kind of an area that people are interested in pitching about at the moment. But also it's sort of surprising, like sometimes I have to remind myself that like, because I go to every event, because I like see all these talk ideas, there's often like a desire to have something new, like in terms of what's the newest thing. But the reality is there's lots of people who are attending events. They might only attend one event a year. They might only attend, one event every couple of years. They might be relatively new to the industry. So sometimes it's like, it doesn't necessarily have to be completely fresh, but it's sort of just got to be a slightly different angle on how it's approached. So, I think like sometimes you're looking for new talks that would never have appeared at a previous event we've ever programmed. But equally, sometimes some of our most successful, most popular, most kind of like, ticking all our, objectives talks have been those that actually could have been at an event 5 years ago. It's just that someone's brought a slightly different perspective on it, or framed it in a slightly different way that's kind of appealed to a new audience. Because again, it's like different people at different stages of their career. They're at different stages of their like planning process that they're at. And yeah, like there's a temptation sometimes in agencies and events to make it seem like search is this constantly shifting thing, Whereas actually, there's probably more that stays similar than sometimes we give it credit for, if you know what I mean. And that's a good thing for me to remember sometimes. Is like, yeah, you don't have to be continually doing the brand new shiny thing. It can be sort of timeless stuff as well.
Yeah. And what would be an example of a timeless talk that you just going to keep recycling year after year?
Yeah, so this kind of it tends to be a bit more kind of that kind of keyword research persona area. I've always found fascinating. So I think kind of partially because that's my route of how I came to search was kind of English language and media studies in terms of trying to understand why things are written about in the way that they are. So that was kind of like my academic background.
That's actually a topic that I spoke on.
Yeah. I mean, and that's it. And it's kind of that's a sign that like if you're wanting to attract and do well on search, right? That's a degree of what you've got to do, right? Isn't it? It's kind of understand your customers. So that you could say, well, that's been true for the last. How long has Google been around for, right? How long have the search engines been around for? That's something that's always been true. But the kind of approaches that people are using, or the tools that are available to help that process, or even just kind of like the slightly shifting patterns of behavior that people have as new search features become available, as society changes. There's still new ways of approaching that, and equally, it's never a bad thing to kind of revisit your process. I don't think anyone's got kind of everything absolutely perfect, and sometimes, again, like in terms of the programming, I don't think it's a terrible outcome if someone's attended a talk and it's kind of reassured them. I think that's like an underappreciated thing sometimes. It's like, and I say this when kind of mentoring speakers, is like you don't necessarily always have to. Like sometimes people can kind of go away, and if they've gone away kind of going, yeah, what I was doing was working, and this person's kind of made me feel more excited about the approach that I've got. That can be a pretty good outcome. It doesn't have to be a kind of like, whoa, I've never thought of this ever before. Like some of those talks are nice, but actually, if you're able to kind of go, well, here's this thing you're doing. It's 90% perfect, but hey, here's the 10% that will make it like that little bit better. That can be pretty good too.
Speaking of keyword research, what's your favorite non-traditional or lesser known tool in keyword research?
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of quite liked that process of, I'm not doing huge amounts of keyword research now, to be completely honest, but in terms of that process of like looking where people are asking questions, so the kind of Reddits, the forums, the Twitter to a certain extent, or I can still search this, and obviously, so that's something I'm sad about. If we kind of go to this process of like threads or whatever it is, or various kind of private communities where people in Slacks and WhatsApps and all that kind of thing, I always quite like that ability to kind of go, how are people describing their problems in a user-generated content environment, and how are the people who are helping answer those questions kind of responding to those questions? And I think that's kind of this. It's almost like the listening in on the problems that people are trying to solve. That's always been kind of like my way of approaching things. Is kind of to go, okay, what that'll spring off the ideas of the ways of thinking about things. But I also kind of quite like that where you discover a pattern. So it's like often like search queries are like combinations of types of word, if that makes sense. So you have like the nouns, the adjectives, and all that kind of sentence structure stuff. And I often think it's some of the most successful projects I've ever had is where you've kind of gone, okay, what's the pattern, and what's that bit of the pattern? So that's the colours, or that's the size, or that's the season, or whatever it is that's that bit of the search query. Then kind of go, well, what are the other variations of that like, so rather than thinking of different keywords, you're thinking of variations within the bit that you then sort of feed back into the search query. And like that's sort of like thinking about the structure of language and how people are phrasing their questions and problems is infinitely compelling, right? So to me, that's always been kind of the interesting part. And then how do you take that insight and then reflect that in your content? So kind of like, yeah, like the connection bit is always going to be quite powerful there. So, and yeah, I mean, obviously the AI stuff's interesting in that at the moment, that you're able to kind of go trying to understand when your chat GPT response is coming back, like what did it get in the question to get that type of answer, and trying to see the connection between the two is, yeah, sort of like an interesting area. I think that like just is my inquisitive mind.
Oh my goodness. Have you tried using ChatGPT to do keyword research or Claude or?
Less so for that, but yeah, it's often
Yeah,
that kind of like, but it's to
that's
find that prompting
it's
stuff, isn't
made
it? It's
up.
that like, yeah, I mean, but I'm sure I know from the talks that people are pitching and stuff that people are doing really exciting stuff now. And I think, yeah, I have to remind myself sometimes now that I'm an event organizer, not an SEO, and like, the competitive world out there of what's like people are doing is like, continues to blow my mind how creative people are being in the process of like solving their clients or their if they're a brand side their employers' problems. And yeah, there's an infinite amount of creativity out there. It's amazing to see.
Yeah. One of my favorite tools to tell people about, and has been for a handful of years now, because it's not well known, but it's really clever. It's also asked.com. I think I included that in presentations I gave at Brighton SEO, and just scrapes the Google People Also Ask box and puts it in a pretty format, and then allows you to download a PNG or a CSV file, and allows you to click on any of the questions to recenter on that new question, and then scrape a whole set of additional questions that are related to those. And it's great for.
Yeah, and like, again, it's that pattern matching, isn't it? So I can kind of go, oh, where there were lots where they were talking about size or season, or yeah, and you can kind of go, oh, well, what are some of the other variations? Yes, yeah, I think that those types of tools are incredibly powerful, aren't they? That's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. And I used to recommend Answer the Public, but that tool has become just clunky, kludgy, in my opinion. So now I recommend AnswerSocrates.com
Oh,
as an
okay.
alternative. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard
Yeah,
of
I was
that
going to say
one.
the answer the public one, because they're originally, I think it's changed ownership now, hasn't it? But that was Brighton based, so the city where our events hosted, and I'm kind of based as the firm that built it were out there before it got sold on and moved on. I think at least once, maybe twice. I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting to see that function, that type of functionality. I think there's some good tools out there, isn't there?
Yeah. So Answer Socrates is a nice alternative.
I'm writing that one down now. Where's my pen?
So let's talk about workshops. Why longer workshops, and how do you pick the topics for those? And is the pitch process different for that?
Yeah, so like our format is in the US. This is the format, and like largely it is the UK very slightly. We've got 2 days of conference. They're like Thursday, Friday, and there'll be multi-track, multi-speakers, like 12 speakers per track per day. So I don't know, 48 speakers per day, something like that, and they'll be all like 20 minutes long. And we like that because it allows like a kind of, you can cover all these different topics, you can go in like all these different directions, people can move about, they can choose what their experience is. But the reality is that they're kind of quite shallow. It's the nature of like, there's only so much you can do in 20 minutes. So we've always had like a training element. So like we do them on the Wednesday now. So there'll be like a more in-depth single topic. So like Gareth, who we're talking about, does our advanced link building one as an example, and there'll be like 10 till 4 or 9 till 3, or like a day, but not a complete full day, with a decent lunch and some decent breaks. And yeah, they're just kind of more training, really. So they're like training workshops, and the hope there is they're kind of the opposite to that. Like a little bit of everything, right? There'll be a relatively narrow topic, and they'll be in depth in that one, and like different forms of learning as well. So like the reality is that like lots of conferences and ours, particularly the main conference we have, like a person on a stage with a great big PowerPoint talking, and that's like the format that's there, and it works well. But whereas that's not necessarily always the best way to learn, like exercises and discussion and group work are often kind of a lot more effective as ways of kind of really internalizing some knowledge. So that's what the workshops and the training courses, as we sort of also call them, that's their intentions. They're allowing that kind of slightly more considered form of learning. And yeah, they're topic wise, that like we try to keep them that they're like an area, like a subspecial. So we've had like SEO auditing, we do like JavaScript and SEO. We've had some vertical ones, so like we do like an e-commerce SEO one. We did like a general brand side one, and yeah, like the theory of those is that allows it to be a slightly narrow but deep, whereas the conference bit is like broad but shallow. And yeah, like so the process there is that like, there's fewer potential topics. So like like there'll be a GA4 one, and we get kind of these ebbs and flows. So like advanced link building is kind of like beyond just the basics of link building. Very, very popular a couple of years ago. Perhaps a little bit less popular now, but not still like people need it. But then we've got like GA4, which obviously wasn't a thing like 2 years ago, and probably will be much significantly less of a thing in 2 years from now. But like you get this ebb and flow of kind of areas that people are trying to skill up in. And yeah, often that kind of there'll either be the pitch process is slightly different there, where either we'll like identify a need for some like a workshop, and that's usually because we'll get 3 or 4 talks about it and they'll go down really, really well, and we kind of go, okay, well there could be more in this. Or occasionally like the trainer, the workshop host will come to us and say, hey, I've been working on like a day's worth of material that I think would work quite well. Do you think that could work for our audience? So it's kind of, yeah, a bit of a, different one that kind of goes through that process. But it's often that kind of, what's interesting with those is trying to think about like, well, what's the package that's going to be, because it's a product really. Like, so like we want it to be like really useful, but it also needs to be something that like people know that they want. And sometimes we'll often get like a trainer or person will come to us and kind of like, I can see that like if you attended this like session, it would be incredibly useful, but people might not realize that they've got that problem. And even to us, to some extent, we've had ones like that, like project management is like a skill that I think like most SEOs can improve their ability to handle projects using the approaches that a project manager would use. But when we've hosted them in the past, they've just never quite taken, because it's like people don't want, like, not they don't want to learn about it, but you know what I mean? There's that kind of like, there's this different, it needs to be not only just something that's going to be useful, but someone's got to want to learn about it. And that's sometimes, I've made mistakes on that front where I've been, this will be incredibly useful for people, but if people don't have an interest in that, then it doesn't matter how useful it is.
Well, the old adage that you sell them what they need, but I mean, you give them what they need, but you sell them what they want. So
yeah, that's a really good way of framing it, I think. Yeah,
makes me think of those pill pockets that you put medicine in for your animal, your dog or cat, and then that's how they'd eat it. Yeah,
yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I think you're right. It is that, yeah, and like I perhaps underappreciated that, like in the earlier days of my career, is like, yeah, it's what people, want to learn. And again, that's kind of really interesting. Again, when we're kind of choosing what talks are on when, we'll often kind of say to people that because it's multi-track, it's a bit like, well, they've chosen you to be in your session. So like sometimes, like when we're going through people and helping them with their deck, we'll kind of say they spend too long kind of like explaining why something's important. And we kind of have to go, look, they chose your talk. They didn't choose the other 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 that are running at the same time. They're probably already pretty persuaded that it's an important thing to learn about. So spend more time on the how rather than the why. And I think that's kind of, it's probably, again, that kind of similar thing where it's like, if they decided they want to learn about it, they're interested in how they do it, right? Rather than kind of like persuading them they should be there because they've already made that choice.
Yeah. Speaking of those kinds of rookie mistakes for speakers of spending all that time explaining the why, what would be your top like speaker mistakes or presentation mistakes that you see time and again and you have to keep correcting or mentoring?
Yeah, it's interesting because like you become aware that some of it's like a preference thing. So like there's very much a particular visual style of presentation that I quite like. That isn't necessarily best, but it's just like my preference. Quickly framing why something's important, but not making it as useful as possible, I think is kind of a good one to do. I quite like when people like almost plan what they're going to say first and then get into the slides, because you sometimes see this kind of like predicament where it can become a bit clunky because they've moved bits around, and that doesn't necessarily always work. So that kind of like decide what you're going to say first and then worry about the presentation as a means of communicating what you're trying to say, rather than using the construction of the deck to construct your argument or construct your narrative or construct your kind of point of view that you've got there. Also, like generally speaking, people often try to do too much in too little time. So like it doesn't help our talks are short, right? So that's like, it exacerbates that. But the amount of times that that people will kind of come to us and they've maybe never not really done a run through till the event's quite near, and then they suddenly discover that they've got 40 minutes of material.
Yeah.
And, it's like, so it's again, that kind of like, people are kind of go, oh, here's the 20 things you need to do. It's like, you've got 20 minutes. You cannot cover 20
Yeah.
things, right?
And I have 100
Eyes,
slides.
yeah. And the slide count's an interesting one as well, because you get asked people who can do lots of slides in short periods of time. And yeah, it's not, lots of slides doesn't necessarily mean a long talk, but yeah, like 20 dense slides can take a lot longer than 100 like light slides. But yeah, I definitely think that kind of, yeah, if you go, here's what I want to cover, like I'd say immediately half that, because that's probably a good start. Yeah, half what you're trying to cover. And then, yeah, like it's much better to have, 15 minutes of material and like room to suddenly a thought occurs to you on the day as you're presenting it, that because the neurons are fired in a particular way, that you've got the ability to go off on that bit of a tangent rather than like already kind of cramming stuff in. And then when those like tangents or things you've never thought of before pop up, you just haven't got time because you've got too much material to do. And again, the nature sometimes of like how people like rightfully structure a presentation is that often the best bits, so the most valuable, useful bits, the actions, the takeaways, all of those sort of bits and pieces, usually are in the last like quarter of the presentation, and that makes sense when you're structuring a presentation. But if for whatever reason they've spent too long or got too much material beforehand, you can often find this like unfortunate situation where you're rushing the best bits, and like that's always a bit of a shame, where you kind of see this presentation, that like the supplementary resource that they wanted to explain, the additional tool, all these things and they don't necessarily get the time to sort of cover those areas because they've spent too long kind of telling you why AI is important and not enough time telling you about, well, here's the great tool that that like is going to help them doing their job a little bit better. But then that's on us as like organisers to sort of like help people through that process and ensure that they've got the best tools possible to deliver the best version of their talk that they can do.
Right. So will you see things like too many words per slide, it's overwhelming, and maybe too small of text so that it's not going to be read for somebody in the back of the room, if screenshots are too unreadable?
Yeah. I mean, and it's an interesting one as well. So like often so like it's a layout thing, but like it's amazing, like often like first drafts we get into people and we'll feed back to them because they'll be often quite like a really good, like the content of the talk is really strong, but the presentation, the PowerPoint isn't quite right because almost they've maybe got used to doing these sort of like boardroom type presentations where it's like their laptop into a screen for a client or for to their boss, that sort of scale. And often the kind of the slide design, particularly for that sort of scale of you're never more than 10 foot from the screen, doesn't necessarily work so well when you're in our bigger stage, which is like you can be 100 foot, 200 foot from the stage. And yet our screen increases, but yeah, that kind of like scale of layout and design can change a bit of that scale. So we often kind of say like stand on the other side, like if you're in your office or whatever it is when you're designing your deck, go stand 12 foot away, and if you can still see it on your tiny little laptop screen, then that's going to be readable on a big screen. Yeah, so that kind of, as you were talking about, Stephan, that kind of chunking tends to be the outcome of that, right? So it'll often be like a boardroom style meeting. You might have 5 points on a slide, 5 different things you're trying to say, and then like for a conference, like just making 5 slides, right? There's no reason to not split them out and then cover them individually. It's like, yeah, much better to have like 100 slides with 100 different points on them than like fewer slides with more points on them, because yeah, like there's not usually much of a reason to do that. To like, there's no expense to having an additional slide or breaking it down. So take the opportunity for like one idea per slide is usually a pretty good like rule of thumb.
I really like the approach of having a metaphorically relevant image and then just a few words of text overlaid so that it is evocative, provocative, and visually appealing and not overwhelming.
Yeah, no, that's really big fan of that kind of trying to use the imagery or the layout or the colors or the kind of presentation of the presentation to articulate a point can like be really quite clever. And sometimes you do that with the text as well. So it'll often be that kind of like, here's one version of the text, and then the next slide is the bit that you want highlighted. And yeah, like it's a people who are good at it do a really good job. But equally, there's some, like I get really interested and excited in that kind of presentation and design stuff. Yeah, it's that kind of having a clear thing that you want to say is sort of like, again, the sort of underappreciated, that like designing on post-it notes or whatever it is, or trying to get your like flow sorted, I think is underrated as well in terms of that kind of process. But yeah, and the good thing is as well, it's like it's always something you can get better at, and that fortunately for most search events as well, like they're hugely supportive audiences, right? So they're there to learn as well. So there's a kind of like a degree of like slack, that like the benefit of the doubt that the audience are kind of always happy to do if you're going in with the right intent and they've got that kind of right attitude, which is obviously lovely, because it is easy to forget sometimes. I like speak to other event organizers who work in different sectors, and just like there isn't this ecosystem of like knowledge sharing that there is in the world of search and marketing generally, but search particularly. And like it's easy to forget sometimes like how helpful and supportive everyone is of each other.
Yeah, and it's important for a speaker on stage to remember that the audience wants you to win. I think that spans many topics, not just SEO, or I think it's kind of a general rule, unless you are talking to a room of direct competitors who want you out of business. But typically they want you to win, they want you to succeed. So don't apologize, don't say that this is your first time speaking, or like I don't know, just point out some foible or something at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, like, so the other one, people go, "Oh, I'm so tired," or "I'm hungover," or like, "Oh, I only just finished the slides." It's like, don't say that. That might be true, but like, present the best version. Yeah, that like,
Or I'm
be
so
confident.
nervous.
Yeah. So it's like, the mistakes that you think you're making are like amazing that people don't notice, right? So like, it's most people are their own harshest critic, aren't they, on that kind of side of things? So.
Do you see any particular approaches to speaking that are quite remarkable? They have some sort of shtick about them, and it makes for much greater presentation.
I mean, yeah, you get so like one of the like we try to, like I say, vary the speakers we get over time, but one who we've had for a long time, largely because he does our training, so it's a guy called Greg Gifford, who does kind of like uses films as a theme. And
Yes, he's got a shtick. Yes, he does.
yeah, and he'll often do very, very well. And I mean, again, it just like his stick there is to kind of like have the scenes from movies as kind of to illustrate his presentation.
Yes, the movie references. Yeah.
And that's helpful for him because it gives them a means of like, well, when he's creating a deck, what can he use to kind of get through it? And people love that as well. I mean, there's lots of different ways, and it's just that kind of what's the device that you want to use to sort of get across the point that you're trying to. And yeah, I like, there are other people like Arij from Women in Tech SEO and Hannah Smith as well. Both seem to have quite a similar style where they'll have like 250 slides. But they'll often be like a word per slide, and like that's just the way in which they work, and it works quite well. And then there'll be others who will be like 4 slides and they were just all images, so there's no perfect way of doing it, but I think it like certainly you see with the more experienced speakers or the people who've done it many times that they've often developed their approach.
Has Marty Weintraub spoken for you?
No, I've heard like definitely on the US ones. He's on our list to get as well. Yeah, I've never actually seen him speak myself, but yeah, again, by reputation, sort of like has very good style and approach.
Yeah, he does that 3 times the number of slides than you could possibly imagine fitting into a short talk, but he makes it work. It's really fun and fast moving, and clearly he's rehearsed it a number of times so that he knows he can fit it into the allotted time.
Yeah, I think that's it. A charisma does go a long way as well. Like, I mean, as much as like I talk about like, that we always want new speakers, and that works quite well. But yeah, there's certainly a kind of a knack that an experienced speaker can sometimes bring, where like they know themselves, so they sort of know what works on there. And you end up like, I mean, in any of these, like doing a podcast or doing a client meeting or going up and doing a conference presentation, you're presenting a version of yourself that's not like all of it, and it's not necessarily like precisely who you are. You're kind of, it's a performance of sorts. And yeah, there's no harm in kind of leaning into a particular like approach that you've got and that kind of thing. And, you know, like, so we'll do things on stage, like, so we'll do some silly competitions and stuff, and we've got this long running thing where I use a t-shirt cannon to shoot t-shirts out of the into the audience. And like the first time we did it, it accidentally went wrong. It got a laugh. So now every time we do it, like, we deliberately make the t-shirt cannon not always work, because it's become sort of like this on-running joke about, like, I can't function to make a t-shirt cannon work. And for most people who've never been before, it's never a thing. But then for the people who are returning, it's a bit of a kind of thing that they get across. Like, it's a continuity thing. And yeah, it's like, again, just these sort of like, you know, developing a connection with your audience, isn't it? That's like never a bad thing to sort of work into your thinking.
Yeah. And as far as other events, do you still speak at other people's events? Because that's how we met in person.
Not as much as I did. No, I don't know what to talk about anymore. I'm kind of this weird one where I don't do as much SEO as I did in the past. But yeah, I've done a few over the years, and it's an enjoyable one. And like, again, it's this kind of the irony being that, like, when Brighton SEO very first started, part of it was sort of this. I was very, very fortunate very early on in my career that I got an opportunity to speak at SMX London, the first ones, 2007, I want to say. And I'd only been doing SEO about 9 months or so not a very long period of time. So I'd kind of got invited because I was blogging and, you know, like, active on Twitter and that kind of thing. So I'd kind of got this opportunity quite early, and then, like, to some extent, like, got this great, like, initial, wow, yeah, I can do this, I love this. And then never really got any more speaking slots afterwards for a little period of time. And that's sort of where Brighton SEO came in. And it was sort of like motivated by this, like, well, I can get up and do the moderating and do that sort of stuff. That's why I'll do this event. And that sort of helped it grow initially. But then bizarrely, in doing that, made myself that I don't like, I don't get opportunity now because I'm not very good. I'm not a very good SEO anymore. But also because I'm now, like, doing my own events. It's a bit weird to get invited and do someone else's event so much as well. So sort of like the thing that I liked doing, which was going up and doing the presenting, I created a job where it makes it very difficult for that to be the case now. But yeah, I still get to do my, like, moderating and emceeing, which is kind of a similar thing. So yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, and you're very good at that, by the way. Have you gotten training on that?
Yeah, I like to, again, like, yeah. So, like, I see some moderators who've got these amazing notes and, like, this ability to do, like, host really good Q&A, and it's like, oh, that's not like, I'm nowhere near that professional. But I kind of, yeah, my angle is that I go up and sort of present a version that hopefully is endearing and kind of sets a bit of a context of how we do what it is that we do. And yeah, again, it's that, you know, in any sort of environment, you're trying to kind of, I don't know, what's the way of putting it, like, you know, present a culture that, like, is unique to that organization or that kind of company. And yeah, that's like, so I've often been torn. So I moderate the largest stage in the UK, and I'm probably going to do similar in San Diego. And I'm often kind of like, should I not do it? Because in reality, like, I don't get to see the other stages. I don't get to see a lot of the speakers I'd like to check out because I'm there waiting to introduce the next speaker, which is a shame. But then equally, I kind of go, well, there's a lot of, like, the ability for me as a, like, organizer to influence the tone and feel of the event by doing that moderating is kind of quite powerful. And, like, again, in the emails that we write, in the, like, copy of the social media updates that we're doing, we're all trying to bring that tone of voice. And I'm not writing that every email, like I haven't done for a number of years, but I'm trying to make it feel like I could have, you know, and that's kind of a degree of authorship of sorts that, like, again, hopefully makes it distinctive from, you know, those that either have a different tone of voice or like no tone of voice at all, which is sometimes a bit of the danger in business events, that they can be a bit like, was it the, you know, you know, in some random Hilton in wherever it is, and like you, like a year later, didn't know what the name of that show was. You know, that's like a real, like, missed opportunity, I think, for event organisers, is trying to be memorable in some way, shape or form. And I'm sure, like, what we do probably is annoying to some people, and it doesn't, like, connect with them, but hopefully for the people who do come and appreciate it, it's a memorable experience that they have.
Yeah, it is memorable, and you do stand out. I've spoken at so many events, over hundreds of events over decades, and yours is one of the most memorable. It has a personality to it that most conferences don't have.
Oh, but that's great to hear. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it, isn't it? It's like there are many good ones out there doing it in different ways, but yeah, that's like, for definitely is done with intent, if that makes sense. So it's like like I think there are areas of what we do that isn't perfect, right? And there are things that we do that are like could be improved, but that's the sort of thing that we think is important.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite event that's not yours? Maybe even completely not in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I used to love the Search Love events in terms of because theirs was almost like a yin to the yang in terms of what our events. It was just like multi-track, short talks, whereas those were like longer talks, single track. So like that's obviously like a shame that like Search Love's not around to that extent. But like that I was a big fan of what the work that Lindsay was doing there. So obviously when she was able to come across and help us on the San Diego stuff, I was very excited about that. I mean, yeah, I strangely I quite like events where I can kind of like admire from a distance, if you know what I mean. So it's like weirdly my ideal way of kind of experiencing an event is like going on the Instagram hashtag and like looking through all the photos and kind of going, oh, okay, that's like there's that photo opportunity that they've created, or there was this event format that kind of, or this way of staging it and all that kind of thing that tends to be. So yeah, I'm a big fan of these kind of like multi-venue festival type events. So like the bit like South by Southwest, the Cannes Lions in Cannes in France. So like that type of format as well. And there's a few like festival-y ones, like business ones. So there's one called RecFest, which is like for recruiters and internal HR people. That's like essentially like a music festival, but a business conference. So that's quite a cool one as well. And yeah, so there's lots of that kind of like admiring from afar of these approaches that people have got. But I also like it's this kind of challenge now that I find it very difficult when I go to an event not to sort of like look behind, like try and understand how it's working and behind the scenes and that kind of process that like spoils it a bit now. And like even to the extent like so I'm off to a music gig tonight and then like I'll be like trying to understand how like they're not running on time and like like it's hard to enjoy it in the way that like you see the moving parts in a way that like perhaps sometimes it's easier to miss if you're not so much part of the space.
Yeah. So Search Love, that was founded or co-founded by Will Critchlow, who was a guest on this podcast. Do you keep in touch with people like Will? And
Will's big fan of Will's. Yeah, he's spoken at many of our events, keynoted before. Like I'm a big like fan of his style of approach, really. And like so, obviously, like I think probably some of my favourite talks I've delivered were ones that like I pitched to Will for Search Love back in the day. So I did a couple of those that like about graph theory and stuff like that, and like semantic structured stuff, and also interestingly as well, there's one like that I really enjoyed where I was kind of talking about. So it was I went to Sussex University in Brighton, and I did media studies, but they had an informatics sort of machine learning course that ran at the same time. There was this really interesting sort of scenario of kind of like, which now is like really but was chatting about this sort of like 10 years ago, where it's like they had this experiment where kind of the machine learning essentially solved the problem, but they didn't know why. Like they couldn't make the connection of how these things. It's amazing these things when you look back at presentations that some are like absolutely like, oh god, what was I thinking? But that one that Will had approached about kind of like I think still holds up relatively well in terms of kind of like trying to understand complex systems when the outcome makes sense, the input makes sense, but what happens in between, you don't really know how the system works, which is kind of feels like it's particularly relevant at the moment.
Yeah, cool. And speaking of machine learning and AI, are you thinking maybe of having a Brighton AI event and just going full hog into AI?
Yeah, I'd love to do it, actually. The one I've found really interesting. So like my personal, so I'm quite a big fan of Midjourney. So like the computer, like it's essentially like a image generation tool, and I've been really interested in that. They call it like photo synthesis or something like that. Some kind of like weird words they're using, but essentially this kind of like using AI tools to create imagery. And there's some really interesting stuff that's going on around like the prompt engineering, so the words that you can use in order to like generate an output that you want to produce in Midjourney. Like, I really genuinely like would love to attend and would love to kind of host one of those ones. But we've got this weird situation now that like, I go, oh yeah, we'll just add that on. And then you kind of go, actually what it needs is like a small scale meetup with people who are in the space. And like inevitably, like the intention for me is, oh, how do we turn it into a 500 attendee event? Where it's like, no, it just needs 25 people in a room who are really interested in the subject to do that. And like, yeah, you try and solve it with a big one. But yeah, like I definitely think that kind of AI informed marketing, there's going to be, yeah, like a big opportunity for rents there because people are going to want to learn about it. There's going to be tool providers who want to talk about their product and functionality. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether it becomes like enough of its own sort of topic, or whether it'll just be AI as part of email marketing, or AI as part of content marketing, or AI as like paid social, or whatever it is, or whether it'll be like, no, AI marketing as its whole is like a topic in its own right. And it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. It does feel to me at the moment to be more like within the existing areas, but like, who knows, that can change quite quickly in this world, can't it?
Oh, there's just so much happening in the AI space, and it's moving at a faster and faster clip. And I just see if you're not on the cutting edge of what's happening in AI, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely going to be like people are going to become more efficient and going to become more effective in what they're doing, and there's huge opportunities there for people to sort of get better at what I'm excited about it. So I'm kind of like a positive, like perhaps like I've got friends who are like far more cynical and jaded about it all, and like, oh, well, this is gonna, like everyone's gonna get made redundant and blah blah blah. Which I'm less of that kind of attitude. But I think it's going to be exciting, and I mean, I think it's like, yeah, like the rise of social media or mobile. I don't think quite like, I think it's big, but I don't think it's that kind of like, yeah, like significant. But like it's easy sometimes to downplay things or overplay things, and I think it'll probably be somewhere in the middle of the two.
Yeah. Well, you should try playing with Claude. Have you played with that yet?
No, that sounds good. How are you using that?
Okay, so I upload an entire PDF of the whole episode show notes, which includes the transcript and action-based checklist and everything. And then I have Claude answer questions like, can you come up with a quiz based on the episode content? How about a online course lesson plan, et cetera? And it's mind-blowingly awesome. And what's different about Claude that ChatGPT, as of the time that we're doing this interview in July, doesn't do is it's only for ChatGPT 8,000 tokens for a limitation in terms of your prompt, 100,000 tokens for Claude. So you can upload an entire book for within those 100,000 tokens in your prompt limit. It's awesome. It is a game changer.
Yeah, it's going to be that kind of. I think that's where it's going to be that kind of ability to do what would have been a day's worth of work, or might not even have been possible. Like, I think that's where it's going to be most exciting. It's like, well, yeah, like it never would have been economical to do the kind of like analysis of that kind of corpus of text in that way, shape, or form. So yeah, it's exciting, and those kind of things that you couldn't previously do that are going to be so much easier to do than they would have been before. And then hopefully that will allow people to spend time where the work that they're doing in their mind is valuable, rather than the kind of like cut and paste type stuff that like perhaps might have been the case prior to that type of functionality.
Yeah, so it's a brave new world. It can be interesting times for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
All right. So if our listener or viewer, they want to learn more about Brighton SEO, perhaps sign up and attend or even pitch to speak, where do we send them to? And if they just want to follow you and your brilliance, where do we send them for that?
Well, yeah, I'm predominantly still on Twitter for my sins. I'm on Threads as well, but like, yeah, Kelvin Newman, at Kelvin Newman on Twitter, Kelvin Shuffle on Threads if people are more of a Threads person. Yeah, BrightonSEO.com. Worth doing that to check out the events that are coming up. But yeah, particularly if people want to pitch, so if you go to the speakers page, there's a pitch form there to do that. And we encourage people to do it year round as well. So it's like, it might well be that we're sorted for our September event, but then you'll be straight in the mix for our April one. So yeah, whenever you get those ideas, yeah, definitely submit and get involved. And obviously lovely to have people along if they can, yeah, make it work with their calendars and stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelvin, and thank you, listener. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.